Part of what we look at in the edge is it's more than a catchy name. we- this is most of the time. This is where we look to see the signals of things that are coming, that are changing. There's a quote, and I'm forgetting who said it off the top of my head, but it's the future is here. It's just unevenly distributed. So what we do is we look for those edges where that future is already occurring.
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Robert Schmidt, also known as Mr. IoT. I am the Chief IoT Technologist for Deloitte with a deep passion for all things digital. This week on Coffee with Miss Connected and Mr. IoT, we're talking with Blythe Aronowitz. Did I say this right, Blythe? I'm kind of talking to you with your first name, but how did I get the last name right?
It was good. There's a lot of vowels going on in that one.
You are the Chief of Staff at the Center of the Edge. Thank you so much for joining us. I took a little punt on talking about we live on the edge, or are we going to talk about living on the edge? What is the Center of the Edge? Welcome to the show, first of all. Second, what is the Center of the Edge?
Thank you, and thanks for having me this week. It's great to talk to you. The Center for the Edge is a group within Deloitte, really tasked with looking at the long-term structural changes that are happening in the business environment. And given that, what are the opportunities that businesses should look at to succeed going forward? And how is that different from what they're doing today? We like to say we look at the topics that should be on the C-suite's agenda and aren't yet, and do the research and write the perspectives to put them on that agenda. Just to give you a kind of a quick overview of some of our overall perspective and framing, we're looking at the forces that are at work within the business environment, specifically two underlying changes that have occurred over the past several decades that are long-term and really are shifting us from the competitive environment that was built on the Industrial Revolution and how that's shifting to a different competitive environment. Specifically, there's a lot more flow of people, thoughts, ideas, capital across borders, both national borders and company borders. And also underlying that and accelerating that change is the technology capabilities that have been developed over the past several decades. And so that's creating an environment in which, instead of having rapid change and then an era of stability in which companies create and capture value based on competitive advantage that they have, the changes are happening so rapidly that they have to look at different ways of continuing to increase the creation and capture of value to stay competitively relevant in the markets.
That's fascinating. I find this interesting how, to balance the sort of like what's going on today in business, what clients need to do today, this quarter, this fiscal year versus, being out on the edge.
Yes.
I don't know, by the way, was this sort of like the edge? Was this a pun on the edge, or how did the name come about?
We love paradoxes. So Center for the Edge was the perfect name for us. Part of what we look at in the edge is it's more than a catchy name. This is most of the time. This is where we look to see the signals of things that are coming, that are changing. There's a quote, and I'm forgetting who said it off the top of my head, but it's the future is here. It's just unevenly distributed. So what we do is we look for those edges where that future is already occurring to try and bring it back and bring those lessons back into, more of the core, the center of, the businesses.
The future is here, but it's unevenly distributed. I'm gonna definitely look up who said that. It's a fascinating quote. How long have you been at the Center for the Edge? I'm just curious. Tell us a little bit about you. I love having to learn about the people that work in these fascinating parts of Deloitte. I always learn something new. Just today, I had a call with someone in our R&D organization that I hadn't met with before. So tell us about you.
I am a long-term Deloitte person. I grew up in consulting in some of the strategy practice, and about 11 years ago, I transitioned into the technology sector because looking at the technology clients that Deloitte serves. And that was right when the center was starting. And given the underpinnings of technology with the Center for the Edge, we were well connected. And I've been at the center for about 8 years now, which is as long as I've done anything at Deloitte. So, but it's a pretty good gig. So I get to think about great things and work with a fantastic team.
So we did some research. The person is William Gibson, who is a cyberpunk science fiction writer. So it's still a great quote. So thanks for that.
Yes.
So it's a really good gig, you said. And you talked about how it's technology. You came from strategy and now it's technology. I have this feeling that strategy and technology aren't really separable anymore. You can't really talk about strategy without tech, and you can't talk about tech without strategy. What do you think?
I absolutely agree. When the center first got started, it was, part of it was, what kind of thought leadership, what can Deloitte differentiate itself on, to technology executives. And it quickly became apparent that anything that's relevant to the technology companies is going to impact everyone across the board, no matter what sector you're in. It may be at a different rate of change, but it's pervasive at this point. And really, if you look at the way that platforms have emerged and a lot of the emerging technologies can build upon each other, it changes some of the fundamental things that businesses can do in terms of their business model, their, what value they add, how they partner with other, firms in the market. So it really does, impact, the very fundamentals of how businesses are run and how they stay competitive and value. So we absolutely, agree with that. And you can just look at, obviously the old tried and true disruptors that have come in and completely shaken up the market from a different from a tech sector into a different retailer, what have you. And I think it's still gonna keep moving and changing pretty rapidly as we go.
It's funny. I just had to think. I think of myself as a technologist at heart, but I always know that I can't talk about tech without talking about what it actually means to people. And one of my bosses, we continuously had this conversation. What's the difference between the bleeding edge and the leading edge? I tried to convince him that was leading edge, and he tried to tell me that was bleeding edge. So I had to laugh at this when I thought of this about the edge. So I'm assuming you're on the leading edge, not on the bleeding edge.
Yeah, I would say that.
How do you make the difference, by the way? How do you draw the line?
I think that's part of the problem with the rate of change accelerating so much over the past even decade. I think the distance between the bleeding edge and the leading edge is becoming so small at this point that it's really hard to make that distinction.
Wendy, so I like this. The bleeding edge is right here. Leading edge is just right behind it. How far is behind? I'm gone. How far after that is that also really, really close to that?
Well, it's interesting because I think there is it changes based on some of the sectors and some of the way things are structured. We actually did a report and research probably a couple of years ago now, just about 2 years ago, talking about patterns of disruption. And what are the things, the different set of contexts within certain markets that make it a hotbed for a certain type of disruption? Aligning price with use, so changing the pricing model was one. unbundling, products and service. So these types of things, and they impact different sectors differently depending on the thing. So it gets very kind of messy and interesting when you start to peel it back.
So let's get concrete. You talked about the workplace of the future. You told me before that you're coming up with a new research paper and a publication in October. And, sorry, I'm an impatient guy. I just want to keep some early news. So tell us about what that's about. Give us a bit of a teaser. And I'm curious to hear about that.
Yeah, and one of the things that we have consistently talked about when we're talking about the changing competitive environment within a business landscape, it's really a shift from the era of scalable efficiency, and that's really how a lot of our tried and true businesses are built on maximizing scalable efficiency. And now it's really shifting. The value of that is it's starting to erode based on the speed of change. And we really think that the next value competitive advantage that's going to happen within companies is your ability to learn faster. So how do you attract the people who are going to learn faster and create more opportunity, more value, and more of a growth mindset versus an efficiency mindset? So that is kind of an underlying theme with all of our perspectives, is that's where we're shifting to scalable learning. So future of work and how you redefine work was definitely a topic that we were very interested in doing, and especially given there's a lot of talk about future of work right now. Everywhere. So it's a pretty hot topic. But most of it is looking at automation and efficiency of the things that businesses are doing right now. And it's not necessarily turned to focus on what could people be doing, what work could be done, and really focusing on how that might add value versus just go after that next dollar of efficiency, which is kind of it gets harder and harder to get more efficiency the more efficient you become. So it's a hard game to sustain.
I'm sorry, you mentioned automation. When I hear automation, I think of RPA, robotic process automation. And for me, that's all about efficiency. So it sort of feels like, is that the scalable efficiency, or is that the new scalable learning?
It's interesting because that's certainly part of it, and a lot of the routine processes that humans have been doing for a long time, those are ripe for kind of automating, machine taking over. Where there hasn't been as much focus is now that you're freeing up that human time, what's the opportunity? What are you going to do with that? And how do you create value based on that piece of it? And that's where we see at this point, the broader opportunity for growth and value, et cetera. So it's really looking at, and I can give you a couple of the things, a little preview, as you said, of some of the things we're looking at. It's one of the big themes within this work that's coming out is the focus from efficiency to expanding value. So getting the efficiency right, great, because that creates the platform to then go and focus on expanding value and what the workers, the humans can do that the machines aren't able to, but they have more space to do it. One of the other shifts is the focus from routine tasks to addressing unforeseen opportunities. So, looking at the complex field of opportunities and getting creative around, what can be addressed based on the capabilities of the company. And the third shift that we're looking at is from skills to capabilities. So not just training to do a routine task and having that skill, but what are the capabilities that are you continue to build over the course of your career?
Fascinating. If you're just joining us, by the way, now I'm Robert Schmidt, the Chief IoT Technologist by Deloitte, and you're watching Coffee with Misconnected and Mr. IoT. We're missing Misconnected today, but my guest today is Blythe Aronowitz, and we're talking about the Center for the Edge, and now we're talking about the work of the workplace of the future. I have a question for you. One of the things I love about our research is I always like to reflect back. How well are we doing with what we recommend to others on ourselves? So
eating our own dog food, we like to say.
yeah, exactly. So how are we eating our own dog food on this? What do you think? What do you think we could do more, and what do you think we're doing really great?
I think, it's interesting because we're always probably most critical upon ourselves. And on the flip side, I like to be optimistic. So I think that there is a lot of opportunity that we as Deloitte have to go down this road. It's interesting because of the way that, and as I mentioned, I come from consulting. So it's much more of a project-based, teaming environment, which a lot of the professional services are. So to me, that gives our organization a little bit of a leg up on the learning, on the, being flexible and agile in terms of teaming, bringing in resources where they're needed, when they're needed, and being a more of a pull in terms of how we we look at the opportunities for our people and how they can create value. That said, there is I think there are still things that we have a lot of opportunity around in terms of pulling in some of the technology to do some of the routine tasks that still have to get done within the firm. We try, but we, like most people, don't change immediately. And there's a process with that. And I think having, pulling more of that in, I think is probably an opportunity for Deloitte. The other place I see, which is hard, and we see this, one of the things we talk about a lot for the organization is the value of ecosystems and being able to reach out outside of the four walls of your firm to tap other capabilities in the market to bring more value to the customer. And Deloitte does this quite a bit, but it tends to be very structured, very very process in terms of how we bring that ecosystem together. Whereas in the future, to keep pace and to pull in new capabilities, et cetera, we see that it's going to need to become more fluid. So I think that's another area where we have some really good starting building blocks in terms of how we are able to pull upon the capabilities of others outside the firm, but still have a ways to go in terms of structuring and really being making that a strategy for us and how we're going to win in the market. Not just needing to own everything that we take, but pulling in capabilities to best serve the customer and the client.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to what you said before in terms of how information now doesn't just flow across countries, but it also flows across corporations and companies. And so if you don't have good cross flow on this, it's really hinders your being in the forefront of this. And it's interesting, when you started talking about ecosystems, I thought you were going to use this as an example where we're doing pretty good. Because for me, in my area of the Internet of Things and digital supply networks, we're all about ecosystems. We talk about alliances light, as we call them, where we work with people much more fluid than in the big alliance idea that's coming out of the sort of the ERP times when there were a few that we could partner with, and then the rest weren't as relevant. And I see this in, I always talk about IoT being a family business or a team sport. And so, I live this in a way. So I was surprised about it. I thought we were going to be good at that one. I take credit for being good in that space, but I hear you. I get it. I know what you mean.
Yeah, and part of it too is we find our own edges, which what you just described would be an edge of Deloitte to say this is. And this is a part of what one of the ways in which we talk to companies about how they can go about and learn and do and be successful is start somewhere that's not blowing everything up and trying to put it back together in a different way, but start on an edge, build momentum, and then start pulling the core of the company kind of to that edge in terms of how you do it, which sounds like what you're doing with ecosystems, because I'm guessing you have some battle scars doing things differently too.
Ouch. Yes, thank you for reminding me of this. I sort of like, I almost cringe when you said pulling people towards the edge. I feel that often, the bungee, it's sort of like, anyhow. We're coming towards the end, and I want to close with one of the things that we didn't really talk much about IoT at this one, but I'm actually wanted to focus on something totally different, which is one of the, I think, great advantages you have in your group is that you get to work with some of our visionaries in the company.
Yes.
You work with John Hagel. You worked with
John Seeley Brown.
So
it's not a bad gig.
No, my question was, so what do you guys talk about when you don't talk about the future of work? What are the things you kind of think about today that you want to talk about next year? What are the things that John, who leads the Center for the Edge, talks about that he is not quite ready to put into publication, but sort of are on his mind? What would you bring forward on this when you talk to those visionaries about it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean it's one of the fun conversations we get to have in terms of what are those ideas that aren't quite there yet, but we think in a year or so are going to be at a point where we can go and dig into them a little bit. One of them that I think is really interesting. It goes within the both ecosystem. I would say both ecosystems' future of work is going from the shift we think is coming from the gig economy to the guild economy. So this goes back to, instead of one-off transactional gig type of things, how is the workforce going to be connected, learning from each other, really woven together, even if they are doing projects, being pulled to different projects, and start resembling more of a guild economy versus individuals that can be pulled in for specific skills and transactions. Another one that I think all of our entire team was really excited about and fascinated about, but I think it still is percolating a little bit, is looking at trust and how trust has been eroded between companies and people, and at all different levels, employees and employers. It seems like there's a little more lack of trust than there has been in the past, brands, etc. And what is the ripple effect of that? What's causing it? What's the impact of that? And then how do you go about building trust in this new environment and really using that as a competitive advantage as well?
Wow, what a great note to end on, trust. It reminds me, there is a software company I really enjoy working with, and they don't call the security department security, they call the security department trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I really love this because, often we have to go and talk about trust, security versus privacy, and, both of them going to trust, right? And and I think lastly, when you talk about trust, I think of trust into my own company. How do I trust what goes on there? So there's so much to that. I love that you kind of brought this up. Thank you for that. And I just want to say, unfortunately, this coffee break is coming to a close. Blythe, thank you so much for joining us. It was great chatting.
Likewise.
Thank you. Please join us again next Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, for another coffee with Miss Connected and Mr. IoT. And by the way, if you missed any part of today's conversation or any past episodes, come and check out our playlist on YouTube, and you can watch us again. And with that, let's have a fabulous Friday.
You do the same.
And thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.